Two Palestinian protesters were shot dead by Israeli forces on Tuesday during anti-occupation rallies on the Gaza border with Israel. 59 were killed on Monday in protests against the relocation of the US Embassy to Jerusalem. The UN Security Council, which held a special meeting on the matter, condemned the killings, but not all members seemed willing to work on measures to end the violence.
The silence of this council since the beginning of the crisis is becoming less and less understandable.
The vacuum in constructive international efforts, as was shown by recent events, is very dangerous.
We urge the parties concerned to stop the violence and abusive use of force, and in particular to stop actions that target civilians. The use of violence and force will not bring security to anyone.
We need to look forward and we need to work urgently towards a resolution of the long-standing issues between Israel and the Palestinian people. Like this council, the United Kingdom is committed to a two-state solution with Jerusalem as a shared capital and to achieving peace and stability in the wider region.
The United States deplores the loss of human life. But there is a lot of violence throughout the region, and I will note that the double standard is all too common in this chamber and working overtime today. Those who suggest that the Gaza violence has anything to do with the location of the American embassy are sorely mistaken.
However, as Caleb Maupin now explains, Nikki Haley's accusations may be a double-edged sword.
The day that the American embassy was officially moved to Jerusalem was a day of great jubilation for American and Israeli officials.
What a glorious day. Remember this moment.
But across the Palestinian territories, it couldn't have been more different. In beleaguered Gaza, there was nothing but suffering and chaos.
Our greatest hope is for peace.
The United States is prepared to support peace negotiations.
The United States is prepared to support a peace agreement in every way that we can.
I don't think it hurts the peace plan. The peace plan will be introduced at the appropriate time.
There was certainly not any criticism of any of Israel's extreme use of force by anyone in the Trump administration.
Hamas terrorists, backed by Iran, have incited attacks against Israeli security forces and infrastructure.
So Israel is not responsible for shooting Palestinian protesters, some of whom were just children, shot down by their own soldiers? But if you replace Israel with Syria, suddenly Nikki Haley's heart bleeds for the dead in far less clear-cut situations.
Yesterday morning, we awoke to pictures, to children being carried in the arms of desperate parents.
Yes, all the talk about human rights does not apply to Palestinian protesters. They do not get America's support because they're not protesting in the right country.
Big protests in Iran. The people are finally getting wise as to how their money and wealth is being stolen and squandered on terrorism. Looks like they will not take it any longer. The USA is watching very closely for human rights violations.
With Israel, all bets are off. On World Press Freedom Day, Heather Nauert was all about championing the rights of journalists. That is, until somebody mentioned Gaza.
We see all too often that journalists continue to take great risks to pursue this important work.
Would you also condemn the recent deaths of Palestinian journalists in the Gaza Strip?
Look, there are unfortunately a lot of journalists who die all around the world. I'm not going to be able to list every single death of a journalist. And we understand that Israel has a right to defend itself.
Back in April, Yasser Mutaja, a Palestinian photojournalist who was wearing a jacket clearly marked press, was shot by an Israeli sniper. Now, if this was intentional, it could possibly constitute a war crime by Israel. But Heather Nauert thinks it was self-defense. Either way, she doesn't have time to talk about every journalist who's been killed. And apparently his death doesn't fit in with Washington's agenda. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.